Welcome to Module 4. Corey Poirier is a multiple-time TEDx, Mo Mondays, and PMX speaker. He is also the host of the top-rated Conversations with Passion radio show, founder of the speaking program Blue Talks, and he has been featured in multiple television specials. He's a great guy. He's a columnist with Entrepreneur and Forbes magazine. He's been featured in or on CBS, CTV, NBC, ABC. He's a Forbes Coach Council member and is one of the few leaders featured twice on the popular Entrepreneur on Fire show. He has also interviewed over 6,000 of the world's top leaders and has spoken at Harvard University and the Brooklyn Navy Boys. What has this man not done? I hope you really enjoy this module and become a better speaker because of it.
But yeah, so thank you so much for having me, Kendra. I'm super stoked for tonight. As you know, I'm super passionate about speaking. This is my, it's my biggest passion. I guess to tell you guys how I got into speaking is probably the first starting point. I was one of those people that was absolutely terrified of speaking on the stage. I don't know if anybody either is that way now or started that way. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about as far as the fear of being on a stage. You probably know this, but the number one fear in the world above death is public speaking. So Jerry Seinfeld, the comedian, has said what that means is that for the average person, if you're at a funeral, you'd rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy. And so that's the fear level for a lot of people speaking. And I want to make this clear. Why I'm bringing this up is not to scare you about speaking, but to say that's where I started. So what that tells you and what that told me is it can be learned. You know, a lot of people I talked to early on said to be a high quality speaker, you just have to be born with that skill. And I've come to learn that's absolutely not true. In fact, some of the speakers, I mean, I've had the opportunity, as Kendra said, to interview thousands of people. Some of those, probably upwards of 1,000, were world-class speakers who told me that they were terrified of speaking when they started. You know, so for example, Lisa Nichols, if you guys know who Lisa Nichols is, told me she was terrified of speaking when she started. I mean, she's one of the best speakers in the world now. And so I bring this up because you don't have to start out as a natural speaker to become a world-class speaker. So what I'll tell you as far as how I get started, I get tricked into speaking. So what happened was I wrote a stage play for a fringe festival. So similar to say for those that might be near Edmonton, the Edmonton International Fringe Festival. Similar to that, I wrote a stage play for a fringe festival, and I wrote the play because I wanted to be a writer director. I did not want to be on a stage or in front of an audience. Put the play in this festival. We had a 7-day run. Halfway through the play's run, the lead actor, the main actor, sprained his ankle on the way to the show. And so all of a sudden, you know, the way the plays work, you have a certain amount of time. And so what happened was now I knew that we needed more time for him so that we could do costume changes because now he was going to be walking slower. And so all of a sudden, I had to write new parts for the play. And everybody else, all their parts were full. Like they couldn't take on another part if they wanted. So can anybody guess who else knows the lines to a play other than the actors? The writer director, me, the guy who doesn't want to be on a stage. So I had to write myself parts. I wrote them so that I could have my back to the audience with a wig on so that nobody could see my face. I was covered in sweat, even though nobody could see me. And I did that for another 3 days, the last 3 days of the play's run. And ultimately, I realized that I needed to get over this fear. So I asked one of the actors, hey, how can I get over this fear of speaking? Any ideas? And or getting in front of an audience in a public capacity. And he said, well, I don't know if this will help, but I'm going to a local stand-up comedy workshop at Dalhousie University in a few weeks. Do you want to come and go through the workshop with me? And I thought, well, you know what? I mean, at the end of the day, I can go to a workshop. It doesn't mean I'm ever going to get on a stage. So I went to the workshop, and it was a 2-week workshop, and all we learned was how to adjust the mic stand. And then the guy kept telling us about how his favorite comic, Dane Cook, ruled. That was basically our training to become speaker or to become comics, you know. And I said the number one fear in the world above death is speaking. Well, you can imagine comedy is actually a bigger fear. It's just that so few people will try it. They just lump it in with speaking. And so having said that, basically we went to this workshop. We basically just learned the history of comedy and how to adjust a mic stand. Week number 3, we were told we are going to watch comics entertain us. We did the marketing and filled a nightclub, with an audience for these comics, and we were supposed to watch these comics and then talk about what we learned. And so about 5 minutes to showtime, we noticed something. There were no comics yet. So we went to the guy, and his name was actually Guy, who got us into this whole thing and said, Guy, where are the comics? And I don't know if you guys can see where this is going. We couldn't at the time. But he turned to us and said, Comics, you're looking at them. You guys are the comics. So we found out with 5 minutes notice, zero material prepped, that we were supposed to perform stand-up comedy that night. And so, I'll ask you guys a question to think about this. If I could get you a gig on a comedy stage tonight, how many people here without alcohol would get on a stage and perform comedy with 5 minutes notice? I don't know. Okay, I see a hand go up. I can't see everybody, so I don't know if any more hands went up. I have to say, you just beat the odds. I think it's Laura. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You beat the odds, Laura, because whenever I ask that question in a room of upwards of 2 to 3,000 people, usually I'll get one hand go up. So for a small group like this that have one hand go up, that's pretty powerful, and that just means you broke the statistics apart. But having said that, most people wouldn't jump on a stage. So you can imagine my fear when I found out. I had no material, no notice, and so I went into the bathroom to try to find the exit window in the bathroom so I could sneak out. No exit window. Come back out. 8 of the 15 people that signed up for this course and paid for it had walked out the front door already within 5 minutes. They said, not doing it, I'm out. So over 50% just tapped out. And so now the new debate is who's going to go up first. So I had went to Toastmasters once in my life, and I learned if you're going to face a fear like speaking, go up first. So I decided to jump on the stage. I never told anybody. Grabbed the mic out of the stand and jumped into my what I thought was the best joke I ever told in my life, to dead silence. Anybody that hasn't done stand up, I'll tell you, dead silence is a million times worse than heckling or booing, because dead silence you can't do nothing with. 30 seconds of time in comedy with dead silence is I'd say it equates to about 130 years in real time. Just to put it in perspective. And so that was what I was dealt with. No knowledge we are going to be performing. Deliver my first joke. It bombed. So I said, but you know what? I'm already on the stage. I did the hard part. Let's go into joke number 2. Delivered the second joke. It bombed. And I think I saw a tumbleweed go by the stage. You know what a tumbleweed is? Like, this was a mess. And so finally, Guy calls me over the corner of the stage. He gives me a schmuck in the back of the head, and he says, you idiot. What are you doing out there on the stage? We haven't even turned the mic on yet. And so the first time I ever performed stand-up, I didn't know I was supposed to turn the mic on. So the audience couldn't hear me. And they were probably just going, what is this guy talking about? So I used to finish that way with the story, but now I'll add, because people always ask me what happened after that. And the after that is that we got the mic turned on and I told the jokes again and they bombed again. So I think I'm the only comedian in history to ever bomb twice in 10 minutes with the exact same material. I don't know if that rates me high or low, but that was my jump into speaking. So what happened from that point forward essentially is I kept going back week after week in comedy and bombing week after week after week. I bombed horribly. And I mean, most people would say, why are you still going back? You're not getting any laughs. And what would pull me back is I would get like one laugh out of 10 minutes. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I finally got a laugh. And so it took me about 2 years to get about 10 minutes of material that actually got laughs. And I kept going back. The only thing that saved me was I read a thing with Jerry Seinfeld where he said it took him 2 years to get 30 minutes of material. And I said, well, if I have 10 minutes of material after 2 years, I'm already almost caught up to Seinfeld. That's pretty good company. And so to finish this whole story off, I kept going back week after week, and then ultimately ended up performing 700 shows over 9 years, retired from comedy. But within that same first year, I discovered this thing called public speaking. And what happened was I went to see Tony Robbins with somebody else, and they said, can you believe he's getting paid to do this? And I said, wait a minute. Record scratch. People get paid to do this? I'm going and performing stand-up comedy and paying gas to get to the club, getting $5 from the door, and somebody's getting paid to do this? I want to know about that. And that's what launched my speaking career, because then I was obsessed. I wanted to know how I could get paid to do this. And so that's kind of tells you a lot about my backstory, because we'll talk about that story in a little bit. Like, just so you know, there's reasons why I told you the story I just did in the exact way I did, and I'll dissect that a little bit. But having said that, it also tells you a little bit about how I got into speaking, and also the fact that anybody can learn the craft of speaking. So there's a lot of layers to that. So I'm going to open up with this. But I have 3 speakers on the screen. And by the way, I didn't choose male speakers for any specific reason. I switch this slide up all the time. Often has Lisa Nichols on the slide. Sometimes it has Oprah on the slide. I mix it up all the time. Obviously, you guys probably know all three of the people that are on the slide right now, though: Tony Robbins, Steve Jobs, Bill Clinton. My question to you is, what do you think? This is Tantra, by the way. I don't think I introduced earlier. But what do you think these speakers have in common? So if I were to ask you, and again, there's no right or wrong answer because there's a million answers to this. I have a specific answer I'm looking for. Most people don't guess it. I don't expect you to, but I'd like to get your thoughts. What do you think these three speakers have in common? Or again, if I had Lisa Nichols up on the screen, you can include her, Seth Godin, if you guys are familiar with him. So again, you can essentially uh, pick any speaker that's world class at this level, and just the question of what do you think they have in common, which could be more than one answer. What they have in common is that they all have their own voice. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is Tony Robbins never tried to be the next Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs never tried to be the next Tony Robbins. Steve Jobs never tried to be the next Lisa Nichols. Lisa Nichols never tried to be the next Bill Clinton. You see where I'm going with this? Why that's significant and why I kick it off with this is when I ask people, when I'm working with them, coaching them, working with them on the TEDx stage, whatever that looks like, when I say, what's your goal with speaking? Almost every time, if they're new to speaking, their answer is, I want to be the next. So I want to be the next Tony Robbins. And what I'm here to tell you is every speaker I work with, every speaker I've come across learns, unfortunately, sometimes years later, that all they ever really needed to be was the best version of themselves as a speaker. And by the way, I learned this the hard way too, which is why I put it up there. You know, I wanted to be the next Tony Robbins. And one of the best testimonials I got, I thought, when I was young, early in my career, was he's like the Canadian Tony Robbins. And I thought that was awesome. Another one, great, I thought was a great testimonial was he's like the Bruce Lee of speaking. And I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan. So I was like, these are awesome. But I'll tell you, when my speaking career took off and when clients started saying, you're resonating with our audience, when I started getting the 90% approval ratings, it's when I finally realized I had to be the first Corey Poirier and not the next Tony Robbins. So what I want you to think about as you're going into this is that it's hard to do. It's very hard when you're early on in speaking to think, you know, I'm enough, because most people want, you know, think they see somebody like Tony and say, I want to be as good as Tony. And the truth is, how Tony got that good is by being the best Tony Robbins he could be. Again, not being the best so and so. So I would just rather, I say this from the heart, I would rather people learn this 2 years earlier than what 90% of speakers do, which is go through the path of thinking, I want to be the next so and so and trying to become that person. Now, one caveat is you can learn from the fundamentals of what that person does. You can say, why do I love Brene Brown? And you can look and say, what are the fundamental skills Brene Brown uses, and use those. I just mean, don't walk the stage just like Brene Brown. Don't dye your hair like Brene Brown. You know, don't become the next Brene Brown. But for example, and this is a Brene Brown note, one of the things she said for her TED talk, when people said, why did you deliver such a powerful TED talk? What she said she did was she actually delivered the talk as if she was delivering it to the most important person in her life who desperately needed that information. So, in other words, she looked at the whole audience, let's say like her sister. And if I were going to share this with my sister, what energy would I bring to the stage? And she talked to the audience like they were one person that she needed to tell the story to. So, steal that from Brene Brown. I mean, that's powerful, but it's a fundamental, it's a skill. But don't, like I say, try to figure out why, when Brene Brown pauses the way she does, you love the way she pauses that way so you can copy that pause. So, for example, Ellen, if you guys ever watched Ellen stand up comedy, Ellen has her own very unique way of speaking, and she trails off in her comedy and she trails off a little insult at the end that you don't see coming. Well, I'm saying don't try to emulate that, but also say, why, when Ellen gets laughed, does it work? You know, so same thing, relate that to speaking. Why, when Tony is on the stage, why does it work? You know, you could say, okay, um, what does he do to command that stage? Now, with Tony Robbins, a great example again is Tony Robbins has got energy for days. He could light up a city with his energy. Well, you might not be that person. And again, what I'm saying is don't try to be Tony if you don't have that energy level, because it won't translate. It won't be you. So, by the way, the guy right next to him, Steve Jobs, you know, Steve Jobs was considered one of the best presenters of all time. Anybody ever see a Steve Jobs presentation, like even 2 minutes of one? If you watch a Steve Jobs presentation, his energy level is nowhere near what Tony Robbins was at. Steve Jobs was methodical. He walked the stage slowly. He took pauses. He spoke in threes all the time, which is, by the way, something you can take from. I'm going to talk about that in a bit, but the importance of speaking in threes. But Steve Jobs, does anybody doubt he was passionate about Apple? I don't think so. And so he speaks a totally different way. Bill Clinton, since I have him on the screen, also speaks a totally different way. He speaks in more of a podium lecture style. But all three of them, would you agree that they're passionate as speakers? I mean, and again, you can't agree on the Steve Jobs if you haven't seen them speak. But I mean, if you've seen them speak, again, they're all three different speakers. But and Kendra, you were in the class whenever I showed. If you remember, I think you were in the class where I showed the video of Steve Jobs and Lisa Nichols, and they couldn't be further apart in terms of their style. But then I got everybody in the class after I'd taught all the stuff to list the things they had in common, like using the rule of three and storytelling. And there was like a list of 10 things they had in common, even though when you watch them speak, you would never even look at them as the same speaker. So again, take the fundamentals, don't take the style or their personality. So that's what I wanted to open with. So Kendra, I'll get you perhaps to go to the next screen. And if anybody has any questions on the way through, of course, again, I know Kendra, I think you said it can be either or. They can ask questions as we go through or at the end, and you're going to leave time for questions at the end as well. So, but if you have questions that just can't wait, then let me know, probably through the chat bar. So this is, I'm going to tell you guys about one of the most powerful things I ever learned as a speaker, and I learned it from the world of comedy, which probably is good for the fact that I mentioned comedy earlier. It's called the Spider Method. And basically, the Spider Method is what I share with people when they say, how do I craft a talk from scratch? And so if you picture a spider, if I had a visual, I would show you a little bit better. But if you picture a spider, what I do is I draw the belly of a spider, so like this on a page. And so the belly of my spider is the core of my talk. So, for example, if I was going to deliver a talk for, let's use the aviation world, Air Canada, on customer service, in the body of my spider, it's going to say Air Canada and customer service because that's what my talk is about. And that's what my talk is too. This is just the way I work with them when I craft them. And then what I do is I draft legs from my spider. Now, I work in threes a lot. Sometimes I end up using all 8 legs of the spider, but sometimes it's just a 3-legged spider that can't walk properly. But I use those 3 legs. And basically, what I do is and it's like a mind mapping exercise. But let's say I was going to do customer service with Air Canada. What I would do is I would draw the circle, and that's the body, that's the main core of my talk. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the first leg. And let's say the first thing I want to talk about as a, because I like to work in threes. So let's say I want to talk about 3 things about customer service. I want to leave 3 messages away. Well, the first one could be about how do you create a system for when stuff goes wrong. So in other words, how if you have an unhappy customer, what's the policies you have in place to deal with that? So I might share a story related to systems. And so I'll give you an example. When I was in Disney, I don't know if anybody else has ever had this experience, but I lost my car at Disney. I don't know if you guys have been in the Disney parking lot. It's not small, and so I thought I've got this when I was walking into Hollywood Studios, I think it's called, that Disney park. And I said, I've got this, no problem. I walked into the park. I came back out a few hours later. I did not have that at all. I could not find the car for the life of me. And so I saw somebody with a CB. I walked over to her and I said, excuse me. And she said, oh, did you lose your car? And I said, does this happen? She goes, every 15 minutes. And she said, see that guy up there in the hill? He'll be here next. He just lost his car probably. I said, can you help me then? And she said, absolutely. She said, what time did you get here? And I said, about 11:20. And she got on the CB and she said, Adam, what cars were we parking between 11:15 and 11:30? And he said, oh, Evil Mickey or Fantasia Mickey or something. She goes, sir, your car's right up there. It was within 5 feet of where she pointed. Found my car like that. So for those of you that are in Alberta, how long would it take you to find your car in the West Edmonton Mall parking lot if you parked there, had never been there before, and didn't know the entrances, and you didn't know where you left your car? Probably more than Oh, go ahead.
I absolutely lost my car there, and I was 100% convinced it was stolen because where I thought I parked my car was a huge semi truck trailer, and I was like, I swear my car's in there. I was like ready to call the police, and I was like, yeah, I'll just walk around just to double check. And of course, it was on completely the other side of the mall. So yeah, fully been
So
there.
you totally get what I'm talking about. And it's funny. I asked this in Medicine Hat one time during a presentation. How many people ever lost their car in the West Edmonton Mall parking lot? And one lady said, I did. And I know what the answer is because I said, what would you do? And she said, I actually got it. I called an Uber, not Uber, but a taxi, I guess, to drive around the building. And she pushed her button on her beeper on her keys until it beeped. Pretty intuitive. That was a pretty good move. But the point is, mostly you wouldn't be able to find it. So Disney wants you to leave happy, so they're building systems in to make sure you leave happy. And I'm going to leave happier if I can find my car in 10 minutes than 5 days. And so the point is, I would share that story perhaps during my talk to Air Canada as an example of the systems that you can have in place. And then the next, so that's the first part of my leg. And then the next part of that same leg would be, what's the takeaway? What's the strategy, for example, I want to deliver to them about a customer service system? And I might give them a strategy for how they could put one in place. So that's one example. The second leg, I could say I want to talk about how do you deliver a wow or an unexpected. And so, not to belabor it all, I'll say then I would have a separate story, and then I would have a separate message for how to deliver a wow. And then let's say I wanted to talk about what not to do in customer service. Then I might have a third leg that has a story about what you shouldn't do, and then again, basically a strategy for what you could do. So the idea there is I'm going to have three main things I'm talking about around customer service that are built around three stories, and they each have one takeaway. So that's what I would do. So when I start my spider, I'm going to write that all into my spider. I'm going to do the circle. I'm going to say, okay, what do I want my main core takeaways to be? What stories will support that I have in my arsenal? And that's how I build my spider method. And that little strategy allows me to build a PowerPoint like 1,000% quicker than I ever did before, and also see it visually. And then what I do then is I bring it over to PowerPoint. So that's the spider method in like 2 minutes or 3 minutes, where normally I will spend a lot more time on it. So Kendra, I'll get you to move to the next slide. And again, we can come back and ask questions about all these things at the end as well. Uh, every story, I'm going to share these really quickly, but these are the next things I'm going to share are kind of like rapid fire ones, but every story should have a hero. Every story should have a villain. So when you're delivering your talk, your presentation, what I want you to do when you're crafting one is think about who is or what is the hero and who is or what is the villain. So if you're talking about overcoming cancer, then cancer might have been the villain, and the hope you had or the strategy you had for overcoming it might be the hero. If you're talking about a situation, like when I told you about comedy, the villain could be the guy that got us into that mess that I told you his name was Guy. Maybe he's the villain of the story, and maybe I'm the hero of the story because the pie was on my face, but I still persevered. You get to decide that, but you just need to know that there's a hero and a villain in your story, and you need to know what or who it is. You don't have to share it, but you need to know. And the reason is psychologically, we all want to have people we can root for, and we all want to have people that we can throw rocks at. So you need to have each of those in your story. And I say in your story, I mean, it could be just in your overall presentation, but you could have it in every story. Or if your presentation is one big story, it could be a main hero and a main villain. Again, you might never reveal this, or you might. That's up to you. But you just need to take the time to go, is there a hero and is there a villain? Because every story works better with a hero and a villain. So, Kendra, I'll get you to go. The next slide, I think, is the villain slide. This was just a quote by Alfred Hitchcock about villains. The more successful the villain, the more successful the pitcher. I would say the same with your talk. The more successful the villain in your talk, the more successful the delivery of your talk. So then we'll go to the next slide. I told you guys about this really quickly. I call it the rule of three. I learned it in stand-up comedy, but psychologically, we all learn best in threes. And so if you're delivering a talk that's 45 minutes or less, you do not want to have more than three things that the audience has to remember. So if I was doing customer service, I might say, deliver the wow, be in the moment, and let's see, deliver the wow, be in the moment, and make it about the customer. And those might be my only three takeaways I want to have in a 45-minute talk. The reason I say this is we learned in comedy that when you share even jokes, like you'll talk about pets, you'll share three stories about pets. So if you're telling jokes about pets, you might tell a joke about a budgie or a parrot. You might tell a joke about a dog and a story about a cat. So under your pets theme, you'll only have three stories, never more, usually never less. With a 5 or 10 minute talk, because one of my TED Talks is 5 minutes, you probably only want to have one. But the point is never more than three. And to sum this up, I had a guy on, I was interviewing one time, and he said, Corey, I'll give you three strategies. And he said, do you know why I say three and not four, or not more than three? And I said, no. And he goes, because there's only three numbers that exist in the world. Only four numbers, that exist in the world. He said the numbers are 1, 2, 3, and far too many. So what his point was is once you get past three, most people don't care anymore. And would you agree we're all busier than we've ever been before? So now we even have less time. So if you're going to pull us in, you got to pull us in quickly. So what I want you to take from that is when you're putting together any presentation you're doing, when you're speaking, always make sure you speak in threes. And by the way, if you want to go back and watch some Steve Jobs presentations, because I mentioned him, he always spoke in threes. Like he would say, we're launching a new product. It's a personal computing device. It's a calculator, and it's an MP3 player. a personal computing device, a calculator, an MP3 player, and he basically rhymed them off. And he'd even usually or often he would go 3 on his fingers. And so he totally got this inside note. But just remember the rule of 3. And so Kendra, I'll get you to go to the next slide. The craft of storytelling, really, I mean, this is a thing I could spend a whole evening on, storytelling. So again, the big takeaways I want you to have is, and I'm going to cover this in the next few slides, but the big things I want you to think about is when you're telling stories, make sure not to add in stuff. I call it trimming out the business fat. Don't put the stuff in people don't need to know. You know, people don't need to know in your story what color shirt the person was wearing unless it's the story's related to the shirt. But people do that. People, if you think about friends of yours that tell stories, and they're going, and you know, then I got in my car, and then I put the key in the car, and then I put the key in the ignition. We don't need to know that part of the story unless it's relevant to the story. So when you're telling a story, make sure you're only telling the parts that people need to know. So that's the first part about storytelling. And then Kendra, I'll get you to go through a few of the slides because, like to go to the next slide, for instance, because these are elements I want you to. You can go back to that other one. Sorry for a sec. These are elements I want you to have in your stories. So one is that make sure your stories are universal. I don't know if you guys know who Dave Carroll is. Dave, Kendra, you might know because he's the guy who wrote the song about United Airlines breaking his guitar. So anybody in aviation would probably remember him because he actually cost United Airlines $187 million in 1 month. Their stock market dropped by 10% after he put out his video. They broke his guitar. He wrote a song about it because he spent a year trying to get them to just pay for his freaking guitar, and they wouldn't pay for his guitar. And by the way, all he wanted was travel vouchers, $1,200 to replace his $2,500 guitar because it wouldn't work on stage anymore, and they wouldn't do it, and they refused for a year. So instead, he said, "Well, I guess I'll have to write a song about you then." And he wrote the song and took United down to the knees. Like they would have been smart to pay. And by the way, after that, they wanted to buy him a new guitar, and he's like, "Nah, it's okay. You can keep your money," because he built a whole speaking career off the story. But the gist of it is Dave, well, I call it the Dave versus Goliath story, especially where his name is Dave, because it's universal. We can all relate. I'm sure every person here has had a bad customer service experience and they were just rude to you and said, sorry, live with it, whatever way they said that. And you're thinking, I wish somebody could teach you a lesson. I wish there was a way I had enough power to make a difference. And I think we got to all live through Dave when we heard his story. So it's universal. We can all relate to having a bad customer service experience. Because I don't have time tonight, I normally tell people Dave's whole story. It's super powerful. What I would say is Google or YouTube, really, United Breaks Guitars, and watch the 5 or 6 minute video, and it'll tell you everything about his story if you don't know about it. But again, powerful story because it's universal and we can all relate. So make sure your stories are universal. Second part, you're on the right slide there, Kendra. Sorry. Second part is make sure we can emotionally connect with your story. And so make sure your story is something that makes us happy, makes us sad, makes us cry. Just make sure there's emotional connection. I often say that content is king. Have you guys ever heard that before? Content is king, but emotional connection is queen, and the queen rules the castle. So you need to put attention on make sure you connect with your audience. One of the ways you can do that is telling powerful stories. So super quick story, because I know I also have to be conscious of my time here for Q&A. But this guy on the screen, I don't know if you know who it is, not me. I have hair there that is actually me, but on to my left is a guy named Stuart McLean with the Vinyl Cafe on CBC, the late Stuart McLean. You guys know who Stuart McLean was? He did the Vinyl Cafe stories, has like probably 20 books out about Vinyl Cafe. It was about Cape Breton coal miners where all his stories were about. So Stuart McLean, I interview him. He invites me to his show. He's at his show, and he does a Q&A time. And he said, and I'm going to tell you the story in like 30 seconds, but he basically said, anybody in the audience have any questions? And then he went through a round of questions. And finally, this tiny little hand went up. And he said, yes, sir, you have a question. And it was a little 8-year-old. And he said, sir, what's your name? And the kid said, Malachi. And he said, Malachi, that's a cool name. Malachi, you have a question for me? He said, yes, Mr. McLean, can I come up on the stage and interview you? And Stuart said, wow, this is a good lesson for everybody in the audience. How many people here would like to come up and interview me? And of course, all kinds of hands went up. And he said, and guess what? The only person that's going to interview me tonight is the 8-year-old kid that asked. So adults in the audience, here's what you have to learn. When you don't ask, the answer is always no. So that was just a lesson he gave to the audience. So Malachi comes up to the stage, sits across from Stuart, asks him 2 questions. Then he reaches in his pocket, he pulls out 2 quarters. And he said, here you go, Mr. McLean. And Stuart said, what's this for, Malachi? And he said, my parents told me you always should pay people for the value of their time. So I asked you 2 questions. I figured that's got to be at least worth 50 cents. So I want to give you my 50 cents. And Stuart said, Malachi, how about this? You take 1 quarter, I'll take one, and we'll never forget our night together. My point of this, and I took that story, which is normally like 5 minutes of me taking the time to massage the story, into 30 seconds. But you can probably appreciate that when I tell that story, I have a lot of people come up to me afterwards saying, "Oh my gosh, as a parent, that story I can so relate to. It gave me goosebumps." And what I'm getting at is that story, almost every time I share it, especially when I take the time to massage it, it goes over really well and it connects with the audience and it breaks the barrier between me and the audience. So just think, when a story gives you goosebumps and it's related to you, something you observe, that should become your story. That should become a story in your talk if it gives you goosebumps, or if it makes you cry or it makes you laugh. So emotional connection should always be in your stories. The next one is thought provoking, and also I'll add in know your audience. If you guys know who the guy on the screen there is, Mr. David Suzuki. Uh, for those of you that are in Alberta, I learned long ago when I put David Suzuki on the screen in Alberta, I usually get a lot of negativity and negative energy sent my way. So I actually used it to my benefit, because I basically will put him on the screen on purpose, knowing I'm going to get negative reaction, and then I take the air to the room with it. Like I bring it to, I actually bring it to attention that I did it. But how it started is because I'd have him on the screen by mistake. I'd forget to take him out, because, by the way, in Eastern Canada, he's an icon. He's loved. Western Canada, he's not an icon. He's not loved, except for BC. But the point is that I'd forget him on the screen. So then I said, you know what? I can't leave this air in the room because it's the elephant in the room now. So first of all, know your audience. But secondly, the reason I put Suzuki on the screen when I did is he shared this story with me about phones, and he said, I think we're losing our connection in our world because of these devices, and we have more connection than ever, but we're losing our connection more than ever before. Again, at a time that we need it more than ever before. And he said, I feel like we're all driving to a brick wall because we're all so busy, and we're about to hit the wall, but nobody's willing to take the wheel and turn the car. And that, when I, that story, the fact that he shared it in the way, when he shared it with me, it was a thought provoking thing in terms of this, going back quite a while, but the idea that we're more connected than ever before, but we're also less connected than ever before. So why I say this is, make sure you have something thought provoking in your talk. Maybe a better example is, have you guys ever heard of the 21-day habit? It takes 21 days to create a habit. Everybody knows that, right? Okay, so I asked that question like that in an audience, and all the hands go up. By the way, guess what? It doesn't take 21 days to create a habit. The actual number is 66, and that's by the guy who created the study. But everybody thinks it's 21. So I'll ask in an audience, we all know it's 21 days to create a habit, right? You've all heard of that. And the hands all go up, and then say, well, now I'm about to blow your mind. And then I tell them the name of the guy, the source, how I found it out, where you can find the proof of that. And here's the thing, if you can do that with an audience, guess what happens? If you can show them something they always believe to be true is wrong, then you've got them for life. They're going to listen to everything you have to say, because they're going to say, wow, if he could teach me that, what else could he teach me? So that's another aspect of storytelling. Make sure you have thought provoking stories. And make sure you engage the audience. Simple way to do that, easiest way, I can tell you lots of ways, but the easiest way is just to ask a question. You notice now I've asked you 3 or 4 questions. If you're in front of a live audience, how many people by show of hands would jump up on a stand-up stage tonight if I could get you a gig at Yuck Yucks? When I asked that, using the story I used at the beginning, when I asked that question, all of a sudden I have the audience in with me, because they're thinking, oh God, he asked a question. I need to know the answer. Oh, I wouldn't get up on a stage. It starts getting them thinking about what you said and that question you posed. So best way to engage an audience, just simply ask a question. And I know I'm a bit over time here, Kendra, so I'm down to my next slide in a second, is my last slide. And also humor. So I use my mom as the butt of my jokes a lot of times, and she's all in for that. But giving an example is, and this story is kind of a humor, but also it relates to, I use it as a lesson as well. But I tell a story often about how my mother and I were in a Tim Hortons drive-through on Mother's Day. Guy behind us in the line screaming at us because we're taking up his time, we're wasting his time. It's a Sunday afternoon. My mother's partially deaf; she didn't hear him. He's screaming, "Get out of the line! And I just need a coffee, and you guys are useless." And he's yelling all this stuff at us. I didn't tell my mom. We're driving away in the car, and I said to my mom, I said, "Did you hear what that guy was saying to us?" And now she's an East Coast woman, and she's blunt, and she says what she feels. And she said, "No, what was he saying?" And I told her. She goes, "What? Turn this car around. I'm going back and have a talk to him." And I said, "But mom, maybe it wasn't about us at all, because maybe, just maybe, it's because he's seen a mother and a son in the car, and his mother's not still with him. He doesn't get along with his mother. And maybe it's Mother's Day and he's just upset. Maybe it's not about us at all." And without missing the beat, she said, "Oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. You know what? Turn the car around for sure. We need to go back and buy that sweetheart a coffee." And so, my mother, this is like that's who my mother is through and through. But I use my mother as, I mean, in that story, it's more of a story about, I don't know if you guys ever heard of E plus R equals O, but it's more a story about how our responses to events dictate our outcome. But within those stories, I always include my mother. Her and I are the butt of the jokes, and so I use her as humor. Kendra spoke on our Blue Talk stage, the first one, and she used Pillsbury Dough. Can I say the name here? Pillsbury Dough Bitch. If you guys have heard of her, I don't know, but she actually used the puppet on the stage, and so she was able to incorporate humor into her talk. And you'll always break down an audience with humor. However, I got to add one more important thing about humor. It doesn't always work. So humor is the most risky of the things I just said in your story. So you want to test it first, or make sure it's something that will work. You need to know your audience. So humor is the one I would go to last, but it's very powerful if you can do it. So those are the elements of storytelling I wanted to leave you with. I do have, like I say, one more quick thing, which is the dip method, which again is another thing I spend a half a day on sometimes. The concert set list, by the way, I just thought I would share this. One of the things I do, which a lot of people don't realize, is when I'm building my talk, I actually build it like a concert set list. You know how when you go to a concert, they'll play like a brand new song in between two big songs, and they do that because they don't want you to leave your seat. So like they'll play the Rolling Stones would play Satisfaction, and then in the middle they'll play, oh, we got a new song off the new album, and then everybody's like, oh, I'm gonna go get some French fries because they don't want to listen to the new song. Well, the Stone says, and up next we have Angie coming up. They want to keep you there, so they sandwich it. So I actually do that with my talks. So I actually build my talks like a concert set list. So I actually plan, where are my stories, what stories need to be here. I open up with the strongest. I close with the strongest. So basically, I'll kind of go, what's my two strongest things? I actually often open with the second strongest, and then close with the strongest, because you want to leave in the highest note possible, but you need to bring people in. But I actually purposely say, what are the strong things that I can bring them in with and keep them in with? So just think of a concert set list. And if you need, you might need to research on how concert set lists are written, but just know they're not coincidences. They don't just randomly pick those songs. They actually think about, how do I keep somebody in their seat? So that's something I do with talks that I don't know anybody else that does. So use it as you wish. And then the last slide is the dip, I think. So again, I'm giving you something that normally I should be spending a lot more time on, but I already know I'm a little bit over time. So the dip method simply works like this. Within your talk, within your presentation, make sure that you open up the presentation, gaining credibility. I'm going to tell you how to do these things. You take us in a valley or a dip, where you tell us about the hardness of your journey, the struggles you had, the vulnerability of what you went through, and then at the end of the dip, you bring us back out. So in real time, to give you an example, basically it could be, you start out, how you set the tone is, if somebody like Kendra, you introduced me, which is a great way to start your dip. So that way I don't have to do anything myself to establish credibility. You guys remember Kendra said he's a multiple time TEDx speaker, a Blue Talk speaker, all that stuff in my bio. Well, that's going to set the tone for the start of your dip. That establishes credibility. Why should we even listen to this person at all? The great part is that most talks you're going to have somebody introducing you, like an MC, so they set up your dip for you. If you have to set it up, this is important. If you have to start out and say, I want to tell you a little bit about myself, the next thing you want to do is you want to immediately take it down into the dip. So you want to say, I a multiple time TEDx speaker, best-selling author, et cetera, but I have to tell you, it wasn't always this way. You know, it took me a long time to learn these things. I was hard headed. Let me tell you a little bit about my journey. And what you're doing then is you're taking the ego out of the room. Because if you say, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this and that, and then you just start saying, and this is why I'm awesome, people stop listening. So rather than that, establish the credibility, but then immediately say, but you know what? I didn't start it this way. I learned this through a long, hard journey. And so the next part you're going to do is you're going to take them down into your dip. So whenever I was in sales, selling photocopiers door to door, to give you an example of my dip, um, I did a realtor talk recently, and I said, here's where I am now. They did my bio. And then I said, it wasn't always this way. And I said, let me tell you about my early start in sales. And then I told them how the first year I almost got fired every week. I got called in the manager's office. He actually made me sign a note called POP. It was like a form called POP, and it stood for produce or perish. So it basically said that he could fire me within any week without any notice. And I had to sign an agreement. That's how bad I was at sales. And so that was my first year in sales. And what changed is I discovered personality types. So I started learning that I was selling to everybody the same way. Imagine if I started recognizing the person I was in front of and adjusted to them. So that's what I started doing. I started adjusting to them. And then what happened was, once I started to adjusting to them, I started actually increasing my sales, started building stronger relationships. And once I did that, then everything changed. I mean, my second year, I made President's Club. You know, the only 2 people in our whole office made it, from the guy that had to sign Produce or Perish a year earlier. So now what I want to do is tell you about personality types. So what I just did there, that's how we would tell a dip in a business setting. So basically, they're introducing me and saying he's a multiple-time TEDx speaker, President's Club member, all this stuff in sales. And then I would say, well, you know what? That's an amazing. It's wild to hear that that's me, but that wasn't all. It wasn't always this way. Let me tell you about my first year in sales, and then I would do what I just did and say, here's what happened my first year in sales until I learned about personality types. So you can see where that's where I come out of my dip, and then now I want to teach you. That's the top of the dip.
Public speaking is so intimidating to so many people, but after listening to Corey, there are tried and true methods for becoming a better speaker. It is really important for leaders to develop a level of comfort with public speaking. Take some time now to think about how you can use Corey's advice in your own life. Go back and listen to it as many times as you need. If you want to learn more from Corey himself, or perhaps become a speaker on Blue Talks, please visit him at thatspeakerguy.com. He is fantastic. You will love him. And get going with that public speaking.